Yeah,
Any comments or edits?
I think it should note, maybe we could ask Dan, but I think it should note that there were 6 members of the community at the meeting. Is that appropriate for attendance?
He annotated who spoke at the meeting. We didn't count how many people from the public attended.
But you're counted, right? Sounds like.
Yeah,
Do you usually?
No. We usually log everyone who speaks at the meeting.
Okay.
okay.
Leave it at that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Any other comments or edits to February 20th? No, okay, so I move to approve the minutes of the February 20th, 2024 special meeting of the Wildlife.
Second that,
Oh, I got a second already?
second.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
All right, and then I've split the two out, so the next would be to approve the minutes from the 14th, 2022 meeting, which was a appropriately noticed meeting, but its minutes were approved at a meeting that was not appropriately noticed. It will be discussed again today, but I wanted to reapprove those minutes, okay? And so they were included in your packet. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Yes.
Yep.
And any comments, edits? Okay. I make a motion to approve the minutes of the October 14th, 2022 regular meeting of the Wildlife Advisory Committee. Second,
Second.
and all in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
And I'll
Aye.
abstain since I wasn't at the October meeting.
okay.
Do I need to notate that? Okay,
But everybody else good?
Yes.
okay.
Do you want everyone to abstain who wasn't at the meeting?
Yeah, if you weren't at it, then.
Then I'll abstain.
Okay,
I wasn't at it either.
okay.
Okay.
Well, then actually you can't approve it.
I'm here too, if that helps.
We need 5. What do we got?
Wait, you weren't there. You weren't there.
I was not there. And
No.
I was there.
So only 2 people are here. Ray Allison.
And Tim.
And Tamara. Sorry, that's Karen.
There were only 4 people at the
So
meeting.
there are 4, so we will just wrap it into this
Discussion.
discussion today. Okay. So those are the action items. So let's move right into our first of 2 discussion items. And this first discussion item is regarding updating, revising the natural resource overlay map, which was previously revised or designed, which was vision in 2006. And since then, we have gotten our primary reporting that's going to be defining and guiding us in this is a 2022 summary from Fish and Wildlife, updating wildlife and fish resources in Teton County. So we can start our discussion with that and how it may impact the revised map moving forward. And then we certainly have some other items in there to talk about as well. Now, this probably will involve Rob, who's on. Okay, he's on. So let's first take a look at what exists for the active NRO map, which Rob, can you put that on the screen? Can you share it?
You seeing that?
Yep.
So that is what has been used since 2006. Is there?
Can you insert a legend, Rob, by any chance, or we could just talk about?
Well, can you see over on the side under this table of contents? This isn't a finished map. This is a working map project. So don't expect a finished map here, because I have to be able to turn layers on and off and make adjustments and all that.
Okay.
But yeah, you can.
Is there any
essentially-
way,
The
is
table
there-
of contents is a legend. It's right there.
Okay,
Is there any way to turn on national forest land that's not part of this? Because a good portion of this space that thank you, because that's already considered wildlife land. So just wanted to make sure that that's on so that we can see what's being added in the county, not just what's being added with white behind. Thank you.
I mean, just to clarify, we're gonna take public comments at the end.
Yes, correct.
So.
Yep, I know. I just didn't want people not to understand that. If you're going to show it to them, we need to show them the whole thing. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yeah,
We're gonna be looking at a lot of stuff here, turning stuff on and off, so. I'll try to make things as clear as possible and answer all the questions that the committee has.
but just to be clear, so this is the old natural resources.
This is 2006 to 2022, just before the update was made that was rescinded. So again, it's this light green you see here up in the northeast, and over here on the west and south side, that's national forest. This brown is BLM land and or state land. So there's just a little bit of state land and a few chunks of BLM, and there's some Bureau of Reclamation there too. So for clarity, those are all federal or state public lands there. And that's the old NRO. And if you want to see what the NRO looks like with all the detail, that's what it looks like. That light blue color, that's all those different layers merged together. So you can see the general extent.
Okay. So based on the Idaho Fish and Game summary from 2022, which you have received digitally, correct, Rob?
Mm-hmm.
So you can apply those as we kind of go through. And perhaps, I guess leave everything, because I was thinking if we did one at a time.
Yeah, I'll walk you through it here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn things off and I'll turn them on as needed. In fact, I'm going to turn off public lands. So if we look at I'll turn these off and then add them one at a time. Okay, so from Fish and Game, their 2022 wildlife summary updates. These were grizzly bear conflicts. They weren't able to show us any black bear conflicts except for the last 2 years, which actually you'll see in the discussion of the bear conflict zone update. But there's only about five or six. These are the sharp-tailed grouse leks that are buffered by 2 kilometers. And so to give you an idea, let me go and turn on the old ones. Bear with me here, a lot of layers I'm dealing with. So those are the old leks. And they also included some of the tributaries to the Teton and Badger Creek tributary there were included in their sharp-tailed grouse area. The new ones are these red outlines. So as you see, that expands it a little bit, but not a ton. Okay. The also got elk migration routes and mule deer migration routes. And those are new. We didn't have them in the old ones.
They weren't in there.
And they had elk and mule deer documented stopovers, the white lines there. Those white polygons. And then finally, from figure 4 out of that 22 report. Includes this area, which is winter use for large ungulates here, which is in tan. And I don't have that as a actual GIS layer. This is just a geo-referenced version of the figure out of the report, figure 4. So you can see that whole brown area, and if we were to add public lands back in, where was that? You see quite a bit of that is actually on the national forest up here and up here. Gets really busy here, so. So basically, all of these layers were what informed the change, all these fish and game layers informed the change from the 2006 to the 2023 NRO. And then there was also, let's see, Teton Regional Land Trust, Sandhill Crane data, and these were the polygons that that there were actual numbers of cranes observed.
Yeah, I think the Waterford breeding data that we have is already included, that area is already included in the Waterford layer.
Okay, so that didn't change. Okay.
Yeah, it changed slightly. There were a few filled in spots, but not many. Mostly just on the west side of the Teton River.
Okay. And then there was no other data source besides Fish and Game and Regional Land Trust data.
That's all I recall.
What was that, Rob?
That's all I recall.
Yeah. Are those all the sources that we are planning to use?
Yeah, we had discussed, because having potential holes in some of the fish and game data or a lag time from when data is collected to when it's internally vetted to when it's then released. That we needed to allow, the possibility for public, other sources of data, including citizen science. And then I think it's important to note that we had always intended that there would be regular updates to the data. We were suggesting that those might happen annually. At least reaching out to Fish and Game, asking for an annual update, whether they chose to update it that frequently, we wanted to give them that opportunity.
So you can see here below in this light blue, that's the outline of the old NRO. So you can see how this starts to come together with all these newer Fish and Game and Land Trust data added on top of this. And then you end up with the 2003 NRO, looks like that.
2023 or 2020?
23, sorry.
Yeah.
And again, you can see public lands overlaying that. Let me turn off the land trust data for clarity. So there was some talk of the size of the increase being some astronomical number. It was actually, I calculated a little over 80% increase from the old one, but the new NRO overlapped National Forest more than the old one did. So if you just considered private lands in the county, the increase from the old NRO to the new NRO was actually about 50%. 50% increase. And it went from, I wish I had that number in front of me, but it was, its percentage of private lands was actually only about a 30% increase.
I thought you said 50%.
50% increase in area on private
Oh.
lands. I'm sorry, the other number, gosh, I wish I sent that in an email and I forgot to have it with. It was something like, actually, let me hold up on that number and look for it and I'll bring it up to you. So I'm not misquoting myself.
It's 82% total, including
Coverage.
public land, within 52, 5 or something.
There you go. It was an email to, the commissioners, yeah.
Change number, change number, okay.
Is that right, Rob?
Yeah, that sounds right.
So. Those are all the ones based on fishing game and land trust. And then did we want to at this point also address the bear habitat zone or break that separate?
That's kind of a separate discussion. I think that would just confuse matters here.
With the
It's different code. It's just
Yeah.
a separate process.
Yeah, that's fine.
would the bear discussion include other ESA listed species that we would use Fish and Wildlife Service data from?
Yeah, so the bear overlay is primarily motivated by the conflicts and trying to mitigate those. And we discussed that we have a limited data set because they're just based on where fishing is documenting problems. And it only includes grizzly, and there's a handful, I mean, that's what we're working with. We've approached them about including black bear data, that seems to be problematic. So we started to consult other sources of information, including the demographic, monitoring area, which comes in effect.
Yeah, I'm gonna show all that stuff, Jeff. That's on this map and I can turn stuff on and off there, but I suggest you just continue with the NRO before we get in the weeds on bears.
Yep.
Sorry, and my question was more or less about bears and more about other ESA species that would be maybe. That data would be informed by Fish and Wildlife Service, like Canada lynx or wolverine.
Yeah, in the report, certainly wolverine is covered, but as far as mapping, we've used pretty much what they've given us for all of the available mapping changes. In fact, with the wolverine, that didn't have any, I think there was no data for that.
I doubt we're gonna find much in the valley.
I would think it's all public.
No,
That maybe some limited movement, but
yeah,
but the process does require sensitive and species of greatest conservation need to be addressed. We just don't have a separate overlay for them.
So at this point then, as far as this overlay goes, what do we as a committee feel about all this change based on what we've learned from Fish and Game and the land trust?
That's a comment. Can everyone speak a little closer to the microphones so they can be heard?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, you got it.
Yeah, so now that we've seen what these changes look like, what are we thinking about in terms of recommendations, conceptualizing what we think is where we would ask for revisions?
Well, I mean, the code is always, again, left room to update the ordinance. And they haven't been updated in a very long time. So getting a batch of new updates and data from Fish and Game is, and in particular, having the revised summer report is really critical information to incorporate into the overlays. I think the data that's been offered from the land trust is also important. They have the most complete data set on staging Greater Sand Hill Crane. And, you know, I think there were certainly gaps in the old overlay with regard to big game wintering habitat, which that figure 4 that Rob threw up really addresses.
And that was probably the biggest change in coverage, because Rob, just for a visual, can you show, did the NRO have a winter range layer in 06?
Sorry, I just turned it off. Hang on a second. Mostly that figure 4 affected this. Let me go turn that, sorry, these are all grouped, so I have to turn a whole bunch of them off to show one layer. So you can see, let's see, that's figure 4 from the report. This is the new big game layer. This was affected by other data like the migration, documented migration areas and stopovers and whatnot affected this area, but mostly it affected the big game areas around the periphery here. And to some degree up here. I'll show you. Let's see.
And Rob, just to be clear, that data source to the north, that was based on telemetry data, correct?
You tell me.
Yeah, the original batch of data for
Yes.
deer was
Mm,
probably
They had extensive study of mule deer. And
yeah.
lots of telemetry. Less so than both species.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. More discussion on what we're seeing here for the changes.
Let me turn on the updated NRO layers one at a time. And
Okay,
then I'll turn them all on because it's pretty busy. So that's big game migration corridors, seasonal range. Woods Creek Fen. I don't believe that changed. Or to wetland habitat. South Lee forested. Sharp-tailed grouse.
this is all the new stuff,
The new stuff, yes.
all the,
Some of it didn't change and some of it did, but
So Rob, could you do the old sharp-tailed grouse layer and then the new one, or I guess maybe the fish and game?
do you
layer?
want me to go through each of them and show the new and the old?
Mhm.
Let's be systematic about it, otherwise we're gonna bounce around for the next hour. So this is the new big game. And let's see. Sorry, I've probably got 100 layers in here, so. Oops. Okay, old big game. And new big game. I don't believe we took anything out, so just added that.
Rob, would you just mind with that too? Would you throw in the federal land layers again, just very quickly? On your room.
well, we can do them individually. Now, so being the big game layer from my recollection on the old, I'll call it the 06 NRO. Much of what was not incorporated there was winter range, which became a very big part of the new report in 2022 for the Fish and Game. So that reflects a lot of that change, and it.
Now, let me show you that figure 4 again. And so it added a bunch there, and there.
Yeah. So that piece. I mean, it was well documented.
Yeah,
They, part of what they added, they documented. You'll be winter, they had to see electric. You know, earlier studies.
sure.
It's interesting that they're going through the. So the river corridor and some wells. So, oops.
Yeah.
That's covered.
Yeah, and they have an ongoing with study. I bet you we'll see that in the next couple of years.
Yeah, there's another figure going on right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's mule deer. That's elk. That's the telemetry data you're referring to.
So do we want any other? Do we have any other thoughts on that before we move to our next overlay, whichever one that is?
No, I think the report documents well the importance of the winter habitat for big game, and I think that's an important addition.
Okay.
It's lacking.
Anybody else? Good. Okay. All right, Rob, then we're good with that one. So whichever one you choose next will follow.
Oh, should we look at the
I'm
sharp?
gonna put it on my lap here.
Sorry, you're all talking at once.
We can move on to the next overlay, but I just suggested maybe we look at the sharp tail.
Okay. Old sharp tail. New sharp tail.
All right, so sharp tail
I'll turn off the old one.
overall, is that what we're getting, is a bit of an overall expansion, right, Rob?
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, you didn't take anything out. These were additional lacks identified.
Okay, so additional Lex with their 2 kilometer buffer zone, right?
Mhm. And then these, the canyon section of the Teton River, and then I believe this is Badger Creek. That
Okay.
drops into canyon.
Okay. Discussion about that?
Those are based on real data, so those are counts. The 2 kilometer buffer is to reflect breeding, the highest probability of breeding from the lek. And that's really solid information.
Okay. Anybody else?
Those corridors are primarily that are outside the Lex, some of the winter range.
That's what I would guess. Yeah.
And I think it's also good, important to point out how rare it is to have this in our county. And how endangered they really are.
Yes, less than 5% of their historic range. And this is part of that. So. Also, it's a species of greatest conservation need in Idaho. So I think we're good on that, Rob.
Okay, which one do you want to look at next?
Oh, dealer's choice.
Let's try South Lee. And South Lee, no change.
All right.
Let's look at Woods Creek Fen. And Woods Creek Fen, no change.
All right.
Songbird, raptor breeding in winter habitat. It's the old one. New one, no change.
Can you do that again, please? I missed that visual.
There's no change.
Okay.
Just gets darker when I add the new one.
Okay, thanks.
Waterbird breeding. That expands, however, most of this overlaps priority wetland. Let's turn.
Can you take all, oh, yeah, thanks.
So it added some up here and in this area, which is based on that crane data.
Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the layer that was part of the original NRO, but it had not been, it's not shown? There was a.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that.
That's right.
That was
That
the
had not
waterbird.
been,
Yeah.
I'll show you the 23. That's the 23 water bird breeding. I'll add in everything else. And as you see, the new one overlaps almost completely in one of the other NROs. I mean, I think the idea of this was to identify these areas as waterbird breeding, foraging, and wintering habitat, but it really didn't affect the overall NRO much. Most of the changes came from the big game migration and seasonal range changes.
but there was a layer
It was the waterbird breeding.
that had not been, that was in the 2006 package, but was not in the,
Yeah, it hadn't been showing,
right,
but I don't think it really affects the overall NRO at all.
okay.
And then just to clarify, the wetlands layer is really the National Wetlands Inventory.
Correct, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
I didn't create this NRO in 2006, but from what I could tell, it almost exactly coincided with the National Wetlands Index.
We have others?
All right, jumping around a lot here. That's Waterbird. I think that's it.
Okay. Well, that's great. Yeah.
And that's all of them.
The whole thing, okay. So that's the whole thing with the new information. That's,
Yeah, that's the draft, I guess, 2023 now.
okay,
And again, with looking at public lands, it overlaps that area significantly up here, over here, and to the south.
all right,
And the BLM as well, so.
yeah. All right, well, that's a really nice visual for food for thought here. What else do we want to chatter about? on that.
I mean, if there's not further discussion, I would move that we incorporate these changes, make a recommendation to update the ordinance.
Yes, you act like consensus, not motion. Your advisory group. So you don't really vote. Except for your meeting.
Voting folks think?
Well, you know, part of this, which is one of the items in our agenda, is that are we comfortable with our area, you know, all these separate areas and the reasoning behind a recommendation and the importance of perhaps various species? Are we sort of all settled on that piece before? Because yes, we can move forward and address this as a consensus, but then conceptually, are we all getting our, you know, dotting our T or I's or whatever about why we're choosing these things and what it means?
Yeah, I think, Kathy, before we, one thing that we did talk about, I think it's worth talking about again, is, if Mike wants to give us a little bit of background on YCT conservation. We had a lot of discussion about that and talking about, using the stream layer, is that adequate? It might not be picking up, you know, some important seasonal habitats and, we did discuss that at length. And, Mike, you want to just give us another backtrack on that? As far as
Can I butt in here and ask you to please speak into the mic? It's really mumbly.
Sure, sorry about that.
How does this sound? Is this clear?
That's better.
Okay, great. So I'm Mike Lean. I work at Friends of the Teton River, and we do a lot of survey work with our agency partners, Idaho Fish and Game, U.S. Forest Service, Wyoming Game and Fish as well. And so Yellowstone cutthroat trout, that's our native trout species. They are a species of concern for multiple agencies and a conservation dependent species. Through a large community effort, working with farmers, ranchers, the county, the cities, landowners, we've been able to keep fairly steady Yellowstone cutthroat trout numbers in this valley, despite all the competition from non-native species and habitat degradation. And so we've got extensive data, not only to monitor how that species is doing, but to take a look at the efficacy of all the project work that's being done to keep that species off the endangered species list. Quite frankly, this is really a big push for this community, and we've had great success. So when we started looking at the stream layers, of course, our spring creeks, our wetland layers cover most of those. Spring creeks west of the highway. And then we've got a number of other really important streams for Yellowstone cutthroat trout, obviously, Teton Creek, Trail Creek, Back Creek, all the major tributaries, even Pack Saddle portion of tributaries on the west side. And then what we found is that cutthroat trout are using these tributaries, even the deep water reaches, at least to migrate to spawn, and then juveniles will out migrate in the spring when these tributaries are connected. So even the deep water reaches are pretty critical for Yellowstone cutthroat trout. We've also found a number of really small spring creeks that Yellowstone cutthroat trout use for spawning and for rearing, for juvenile rearing. And so they really occupy a whole variety of of the waterscape. And so when we took a look at how to incorporate Yellowstone cutthroat trout habitat into the NRO, we just had decided to have folks take a look at any water bodies on their property that flow for any period of time. And so if it's just a small little runoff stream that has some water there in the spring, you know, those would be really easy to take a look at and evaluate. But we want to make sure that all these streams got on folks' radar, because I think a lot of times folks think that just because a stream doesn't, that if it doesn't flow year round, that there's no way it's valuable Yellowstone cutthroat trout habitat, when in reality, it can be extremely valuable seasonally. So that's why we included that language of if you have any stream that flows during any period of the year, to include it in your analysis of habitat analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Well. We get back to your suggestion. Consensus point, yeah. Well, does anyone feel like we need to do further digging or, you know, data searching, or is this pretty well-rounded as it stands now?
I think it's credible data that's in there right now.
Okay. So what, no one thinks we're missing anything significant?
So the Idaho State Wildlife Action Plan was just recently approved by the Fish and Wildlife Service as of a week or two ago. It does add some species to the list of species of greatest conservation need, including moose, but I don't believe there's any new data that's included in that plan that's wouldn't already be incorporated into the NRO. And there are no species that were taken off related to the indicator species in our land use code.
And
So I don't think any changes there.
the summary didn't have specific moose data, did they, Rob? Did the
I didn't see anything on moose.
say again?
I did not see anything on moose.
Yeah, I don't think they did break it out. Okay. All right.
I would add that, once you put together a recommendation, then that'll go to a couple of public hearings in the process, so that there'd be a chance for science, whatever, for people to, I'm sorry, I'm mumbling. There'll be 2 public hearings once a recommendation comes out of this committee. One before P and Z, one before the Board of County Commissioners, and there will be an opportunity for people to offer any other information they have on wildlife habitat or places that ought to be considered for evaluation.
Okay, so that would not be then something that would necessarily cause us to pause in this initial recommendation. It could come up later.
It could come up today. I mean, you have a listening session today, and people could offer something today if they so choose, or any future meeting of your committee, but there will be those designated public hearings where, you know, there'll be a much more opportunity.
All right. Then yeah, Jeff, I think we should consider a consensus at this point.
Yeah, unless, does anyone else have anything else to add? Or?
I don't.
How do we do a consensus? Do we just make it sound like a motion?
You don't do a motion, you just simply, if somebody disagrees, you speak up.
Okay.
All right, well then. Anyone? Okay. So at this moment, then we have consensus to have Rob create this as a formal draft of a revised NRO. And we will work on a accompanying letter narrative to the other commissions, planning and zoning or commissioners that, for the reasoning behind our recommendations. That it? Okay, sounds good. All right. That was our first discussion. Rob, I don't think, are you still here, Rob? I talked to that monitor.
Yes, I am.
Problem, I have to talk to this. Rob, I don't think we need you, we don't need him.
What about the
Oh,
big
yes,
stuff?
oh, sorry. You're not off the hook. Yeah, so do you want to move into Bear?
I think so. I mean, since we're talking about overlays, maybe a little bit, again, about the history of our discussions. You know, we've been talking about bears from the beginning. We've leaned heavily on Fish and Game to try to provide more information than what we already have. We've engaged with the Bearwise folks who have experience with mitigating for bear conflicts in communities like ours. We've consulted some of the professional literature on bears with the goal of updating the bear overlay, which in the past was largely based on a handful of known conflicts with grizzly bear. And so we, in a past meeting, we discussed, we talked heavily about the research that was done by Sarah Sells in her group. And we looked at some of those model outputs that were extrapolated to Teton County. And it looked like some of the information was spot on, and others we had questions about. Most notably, it covered essentially all of our, you know, core wetland areas as being very high priority bear habitat, and we sort of agreed that within the context of the county, that's probably not accurate. And we looked at a different approach, which is also substantiated in the Fish and Game summary revision. On page 7, there's discussion about the demographic monitoring area. Of course, that includes the very valuable Victor Front, but also some of the public lands to the north. And then we talked about creating a new draft that would better encapsulate bear movements through the valley. And it's also pointed out in the report, you know, grizzly bears, this is page 7. Grizzly bears are documented utilizing Valley Creek corridors and other private lands in Teton County, including multiple documented occurrences within Teton and South Lee Creeks. And so, given that guidance, we asked Rob to put together a draft bear habitat overlay that would include some of these important riparian stringers that are used as movement corridors. And I'd like to discuss the draft that Rob's put together. We've really, in my opinion, spun our wheels a lot with the bears, and I would like to see, Rob, with what you put together in that regard. Maybe we can have a discussion about that too.
Sure. Let's start with the existing bear conflict area. This is what is in our code now, this red hatched area. on the map. And as you see, it's just kind of drawn along, geometric lines, I guess is the best way to describe it. That's what it looks like compared to the federal and state lands. The stars that you see here, are documented bear complex, the red stars being grizzly, and the black stars being black bear, but the only black bear data that we have from Fish and Game is for the last 2 years. So that's why there's not very many black bear there. We tried to get more out of them, but they didn't seem to have it, at least not in geographic form. And these are general locations, by the way. They're not really attached to any particular landowner or address or anything. It's just a ballpark location for where these occurred. But as you can see, most of the conflicts occurred in or adjacent to the existing bear conflict area, with a few outliers. The one down here near Spring and Lee Creeks, just southeast of Teutonia, and there's a couple out here in the General Drichter area. So there's that, and then the bear demographic monitoring area that Jeff mentioned looks like this. Most of that data is in Wyoming. Where it does overlap here, it coincides pretty well with the existing bear conflict zone. A little bit of a overlap there where it goes beyond it. So that didn't really change things much. Sarah Snell's grizzly modeling. So this is, let me turn off a couple things here for clarity. So this is a model she has for a female grizzly. Males differ a little bit, but generally follows the same trend. So according to this model, the areas that are more bluish color are high probability, and as you get into the warmer colors, that's lower and lower probability. So here, no surprise, high probability in the forested areas up in the national forest, which correspond pretty well with our existing bear conflict area. But they also show it going through the middle of the valley through all these wetland areas. And for that matter, talking to Fish and Game, they flat out stated to us, it's like, well, the whole county's bear habitat. But just as with the NRO, I think the committee was a little hesitant to just make a blanket statement saying the whole county is wildlife habitat. They're trying to be a little more discriminate than that. So in further discussion, we decided to take a closer look at vegetation, particularly riparian vegetation that bears seem to like, and narrowing it down further from that, looking at riparian vegetation that is actually tree cover. So let's look at some of the vegetation types here. I mean, this is really complex, but what we're seeing in the valley, at least outside of the existing bear conflict area, most of what we're seeing down there is riparian vegetation, which in that kind of bluish color. There's actually a few different kinds, but it's dominated by that bluish color. And it corresponds with a lot of the known creek corridors. This is Darby, for instance. So what I did was extract from that to simplify things, looking at just riparian. So that's all the different types of riparian shrubs or woodland that occur in the valley. And then I simplified that down to just one color and converted it to polygons from the raster format it came in. So those are all little square pixels, in case you didn't notice. Let's zoom in and look at that. That's what the raster data looks like. Converting it to polygons, I don't know if it makes it better or worse, but it makes it a little clearer. So that's what it looks like, just riparian. Now granted, this is derived from remote sensing data, the classification of which can be a little bit off from one vegetation type to another. So as a secondary piece of information, we actually used air photos, recent air photos as well, the 2023 aerial imagery, which is very high resolution aerial imagery. And so, let's see, where is it? So let's zoom in on some of the creeks here. So you can kind of see how the remote sensing derived vegetation layer that came from land fire data isn't exact. You know, it's so some places where there is no riparian and doesn't show it where there is, but it generally follows what the aerial imagery shows. So just as at least a starting point of discussion, what we decided was to basically include these some of these stream corridors where there's visible woody cover, or at least where it's either covered by it or very close to it, and add that to a draft new bear zone. So expanding the bear zone based on those riparian corridors. So let me simplify that. And this is the new bear zone. So it overlaps the old one and then essentially adds these riparian corridors. So you can see the data extracted from the land fire vegetation data and then using aerial imagery as well. And this I just kind of sketched in. So we could go back and restrict it only to woody cover, but in some places I actually expanded it to a nearby road just because there's vegetation there and bears aren't going to stick totally to the tall woody areas, but generally following those riparian areas. Turn off the
Rob, it's probably important to note that you haven't buffered anything here.
This is not, there's no buffer here. So for example, I did some buffers to the riparian polygons. Let me turn off the bear zone. Let's just for a general idea how this looks. If I buffered all the riparian from the land fire data, oops, let me turn off some of this stuff.
Are there any interagency grizzly bear committee layers in here? I know you mentioned the DMA layer. Is that from the IGBC?
There we go. So that's those riparian areas buffered by 500 feet. It starts to cover a lot. And that's what it looks like buffered by 100 feet. And again, with the new bear zone, we're focusing just on the more woody riparian zones, following some of the major creeks. But not including all the non woodland riparian out here. It's more low cover. Although Fish and Game says that bears would use that area. But it's more likely that they're going to follow one of these corridors.
Rob, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, did you use any of the interagency grizzly bear community layers? I know you mentioned using the DMA layer. Was there thought about using the current known distribution layer?
I don't have that data.
Is it,
We were not able to get those data, right, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it was up to the committee to chase that down, so.
I mean, if that was coming from Fish and Game, we'd get back in.
well, the current known distribution layer would probably come from the IGBC.
And as I recall, I'd have to go back to emails, but IGBC sent us over to Sarah Sells for her habitat models. No, and happy to continue this conversation, but I'm wondering if you can actually bring that back up, Rob, behind
Mhm.
your orange riparian layer.
Yeah, it gets kind of busy.
It gets busy, but I mean, they totally jive. And I was just looking at Sarah's paper to try and see what they used for habitat in her models. It might take me a while to piece that out.
Mhm.
But I'm wondering, sorry, I think that was Allison. Allison, I don't mean to distract from your question, so we should probably go back to that before I go down my own rabbit hole.
No, please go ahead. I think we're probably jumping down the same rabbit hole.
I don't
Well,
know if it's
but-
possible.
Well, one thing I'll just to try to focus the committee a little bit. Keep in mind that the bear conflict area is not the same as the natural resource overlay. It's the code for bear conflict area is intended for a different purpose. And that's to identify areas of likely conflict. And
Right.
then the requirements relate to things like bear resistant garbage containers and, no bird feeders and that kind of thing.
Right, right. And so in my mind, for those reasons, it's important to understand where bears are predicted to be going as they continue to colonize the valley. And I mean, I know I disagree with the rest of the committee, but I think using models based in radio collar data from grizzly bears, understanding that doesn't capture black bears, but I think that that's a better model than just picking out landscape features. And if the blue from Sarah's model feels like too much, I mean, it beautifully overlaps, right? There's only some pieces of that willow habitat or riparian habitat, actually only pieces of that high level model that are not covered by the riparian habitat, like just west of Teutonia, and then sort of southern drifter on the west side of the highway. Rob, is it easy enough to just carve out that high level, the 10 level from Sarah's model, and then chunk that into, parse that out further?
Not in real time, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not directing you to do that, just something for the committee to think about. Again, I do worry about capturing predicted bear colonization correctly or habitat use correctly. And I also worry about how thin, at least right now, as we're looking at just the non-buffered outlines around the stringers. Like, I definitely agree that we're going to need to figure out some way to buffer that, because bears are not just going to stay. I don't know the size of, like, the width of those corridors, but they look awfully narrow to me in terms of what a grizzly bear is going to smell,
Well,
from
again,
the
there's the
corridor they're
option-
walking through and then
There's
go.
the option to buffer those, Renee. I mean, those are just sketched out. That was the
Yeah.
starting point of the conversation.
Yeah, those are the drip line primarily of cottonwood vegetation on these primary stringers.
Can I ask a question?
Would it be possible to hold it to the end, or is it just a clarification of something we're looking at?
Well, that's kind of the clarification, because I would like to know, in all those bear conflicts, how many of them was relocated bears into this area? And then I'd like to know where is the Fish and Game's official prime recovery area for grizzly bears? Because I think we're reaching out here a little bit too far.
Wait, can you repeat that last little bit of your statement? You were breaking up.
Okay, I want to know what is considered the prime grizzly bear recovery area, because I think we're reaching, if we're going to follow bears clear into the valley like you're talking on this map, I think we're reaching way too far.
Well, the bear conflict zone is not limited to grizzly bears, so just for clarity there.
True, but how many of those conflicts were relocated bears? And
we don't know that.
And I'm not sure that we're
maybe we better
relocating
find
bears into the valley. They would have made their way into the valley on their own if they were relocated. I don't think that the agencies would be chunking problem bears right onto the edge of our valley.
I think we better follow up on that a little bit before we start expanding the grizzly bear corridor clear into the valley. I mean, basically, you're going to have bears in downtown Griggs. Now, come on, let's be realistic here.
And
Well,
I
we
think
actually
the
have-
other idea behind this, Lynn, and I very much appreciate your comments, and I think we should take these to heart and do our due diligence. But the other piece of this is understanding, like trying to get ahead of bear conflicts. As we know, bears are recolonizing into our area. And so if we're not, having bear secure garbage or keeping our bird feeders up high enough or cleaning our barbecues, and we have a conflict with a bear in an area that we just wasn't protected under regulations or ordinances, then we'll come back kicking ourselves, I think.
Hey, but remember, we're not Jackson. So over there in Jackson, they have to take all those bird feeders down whenever they see the bears. So are we telling everybody down valley now, you can't feed the birds, you can't feed the songbirds? Where are we really looking at this?
If I could interject also, I wonder if in the interest of time, we ought to keep thinking about this and then revisit it.
Sure.
A lot of good thoughts, a lot of good work maybe still yet to be done. If that's reasonable with everybody else. Okay.
Well, and I think this was the debate with the committee is to be broader in the approach, or more selective in the approach of where the bear conflict zone is demarcated. The other thing to consider is just enforceability of this. I mean, if we're just considering this an advisory for the public, that's one thing, but the practicality of requiring bear-resistant garbage cans across the entire valley would have major effects across the valley. And sure, it could prevent conflicts, but is it, coming to a knife fight with a machine gun? It's, hard to say. I mean, you guys can advise however you want, but I'm just coming from a staff perspective of, like, is this, is covering most of the valley in a bear conflict zone really going to accomplish much from a code standpoint?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, Rob, and I agree with Lynn. I mean, there's a continuum here, right? From original comments from Fish and Game, well, the whole valley is a bear habitat area. to, well, let's try to identify the areas that have the highest potential for having both conflicts and bear interactions. So that's the goal, in my mind, of the bear overlay. I
Yeah.
mean, we're not trying to overreach on restrictions, and I think if you were to take, Sarah's data, you would require bear mitigation across the entire county, and I don't know that it's warranted. I don't think it would be, particularly well received. That's my opinion.
Just respectfully, Jeff, I don't think that Sarah's data says that we need to cover the whole valley. That's not my interpretation of that layer.
The purple pretty much covers the whole valley, doesn't it? Or?
We're talking about the highest level, which is that blue.
That's right.
Yeah. And that what I was saying to Rob was if we could parse that blue down further, maybe we would have a better representation, but less of that coverage, if that makes sense. And also to clarify, Sarah, if I'm understanding Sarah's work correctly, she's not mapping bear habitat. She's mapping predicted connectivity pathways for grizzly bears. So these are predicted movements using habitat features and radio collar data.
Thanks for clarifying, Renee. Do you think that using the IGBC current node distribution would give us a different result, or at least something to compare to? Would that be useful?
Potentially, yeah, if you can put your finger on it, Allison.
Is the issue that we just need to acquire that layer from the IGBC?
Yeah.
Is that what am I understanding?
I don't think it's bad.
Okay. Do you want to make that a little to-do item to try and look? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and if somebody from the committee could communicate exactly what they want me to do after the meeting by email, that would be great.
Sure, we'll follow up. Do we want to spend a few moments on discussion item policy for technical review? We can spend a few moments with that and then wrap up with a little bit of time for public comment, if there is any.
I think with Mike here, you have a full meeting.
Oh, that's right, you came in.
So we can- don't forget about that.
I can do it again right now. Do we want to do that again? Which ones? It was for the October. Oh,
We only had 4 people present at the
Oh.
October meeting.
okay. It's not gonna help us because we were able to pass February 20, but not October 14, and
We still didn't have
we
enough.
wouldn't still. Okay. Good one, though. Do we have a moment to talk about the next item, or do you want to table it?
I think we should.
Okay. So the next item was just regarding some initial thoughts, discussion about the policy for doing technical reviews based on NRO, the biologic assessments, if you want to call them that. And there were some initial points that the commissioners asked our committee to think about regarding these technical analyses, a couple of which we've you probably saw in their outline, which was pre-qualified consultants for doing these studies with questions about qualifications and vetting, and then just general concepts of what would happen when one of these studies was needed, and what are other people doing. So I'll just throw it out there for some initial thoughts, which is kind of what we were doing before at this time, is which way might this go?
Yeah, I think just a little bit of background since we're backtracking. It was identified by, county staff that the sorts of analyses they were getting were highly variable, some being one pagers from people with skeptical qualifications, others being, maybe more complete and voluminous reports. And there was discussion, how do we standardize that, so everyone is using the same techniques for, completing the analysis, and then trying to have some level of experience or qualifications to put one together. We talked about the problem of doing reports once concepts were already vetted, because then we were trying to fit analyses to the concept rather than having the concepts be fit to the analyses. That was another major change that we discussed. What else? Trying to keep our engagement with Idaho Fish and Game. They are very particular about their involvement in not making regulatory rulings, which we respect. And so trying to fit a process that keeps them engaged, and then giving us information and opinions, but not in a way that is telling applicants what they can or can't do. And just to be clear, the overlay is only a crude net to basically, if you end up being, a project gets proposed within the overlay, all we're asking is to evaluate some of the priority habitats and priority species that have been identified not only in this plan, but in past plans, so that developments can potentially conserve those resources in the future. And Commissioner Whitfield pointed out in the last meeting that none of this changes the underlying zoning or any of that, correct?
It by code, it cannot change the allowed density.
Right. So those were the main bullets I think we talked about. Am I missing any? That was broken sort of under the old.
Yeah, no, I think that was sort of
Right.
our original framework of where we were gonna work from. I don't know if we need to go much further, because we didn't at that point.
Right.
So that just sort of replays how far we were at that in these prior meetings.
Sure.
So I don't need to take it much further if nobody else does.
I think the only other thing you may not have mentioned, Jeff, was how the county staff, a more standardized way to review those reports to ensure that they're complete and sufficient,
Right, that's right, yeah.
especially given, they're back, not having a biologist on staff.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Okay, well. That's just a light review of that. So let's open up, if nobody else has any other items, let's open up for any potential public comment. And if there are people interested in commenting, let's say, 15 minutes. If everybody could stay 10 minutes later if we need to. 3 minutes per person max, if that's gonna be reasonable. So let's open it up.
Do we want to have people just come up to this mic to get it?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you gonna timer me?
Oh, yeah.
Only if you go away.
Be a big bugbear.
They do it at PNC.
Yeah.
It buzzes, it's like the gong show. They take off.
Okay, get the gong going.
Yeah.
Can people state their names when they start?
Yes, I will. Yeah.
Thank you.
Kurt Bailey. And I'm here to speak regarding this. And first I want to thank you guys for doing what you guys do in the wildlife. I think most of us in the community who aren't biologists or specialists I'm always surprised somebody take a picture of a bird and Facebook and post it, 15 people name the bird.
which I don't even want to spell, right? So I think we're really blessed in this valley to have some very talented people that understand the wildlife and for what you guys do, and you're not paid for what you do here, so we appreciate the time that you guys put in here. A few things, and you guys know there's been a lot of attention to this group, and I think the attention hasn't been based on what you guys scientifically do, but I want to make sure that you guys understand some of the frustrations by the public that we've experienced or we've seen that's come out from this, and just indirectly from other processes within the county. And a big one is, I know you guys have been working for quite some time, since August 2022, to put together new overlays. And then on January 9, 2023, it was presented to the board, and the board voted these new overlays in. One of the biggest problems that the community has seen based on the proposal is the P&Z and the Board of County Commissioners went back on January 9, 2023 to every applicant that had a subdivision application in and imposed these new overlays on all these applications, which is not lawful. You can't do that. And they went to probably 50 applicants, some who had these overlays in their hearing, they had them denied, they had to put building envelopes in place. They spent, it's an awful lot of money with a lot of people. Some people gave up, some people didn't have enough money. Because when you submit your concept plan, that's the code and that's the law that is instructed at that time. So I want you guys to understand what a lot of the frustration from the public was at that point, and what's happened, and what a lot of the concerns about. But I know your proposal that you had sent in to the board actually stated in there that it was for any application that's under review is for these overlays to be imposed on those applications. So that, as you can imagine, was a big challenge for a lot of people to have something unlawfully imposed on their applications. And I think the intentions were good, but it really was very problemsome and continue to be going to be a very costly impact for us taxpayers in the valley. So a couple things. I know also the data increase. I had my engineer who's got a PhD in cartology. He went and checked. I know Mike and Cindy, we had this conversation before, but the overlay impacts are much greater than I think what the county's showing the percentages to be. So I know in your proposal, you guys went from probably 20-some% overlays in the big immigration corridor in the valley to 85%. And it showed 85% in your guys' proposal, that 85% of public land is now encompassed by wildlife overlays. And based on some calculations that my cartology guy did, we went from 26% of the valley being covered in just this big immigration corridor to 81% of the valley. So it's significant. And I know Cindy told me, oh, it's not that big, but it really, a lot of people are significantly impacted by that.
Kurt, by the way, it's cartography, not cartology, and I'm a cartographer. And I came up with those figures. So maybe put your friend in touch with me.
So yeah, and I don't know, Rob, if for your statistics where that came from, but I can share with you what I've gotten from my source. And
well, it's not 500%, I'll tell you that. That would 500% increase would encompass more than the entirety of Teton County.
well,
We don't have to do, let's just
Yeah,
let
that's
Kurt.
okay.
I just wanted to correct that misinformation that's been going around.
Yeah, and what I can tell you, I mentioned 500% in the last meeting, but there's multiple overlays that change. Just in the big game migration corridor, we showed based on the percentage it multiplied over 3 times from what the original layout was. So obviously us in the community go, and a lot of farmers say, where did this come from? I've never seen elk in my community or in the valley. And I talked to Idaho Fish and Game, and they explained to me, which I think is very educational, is back 200-300 years ago, none of this winter feeding happened in the valley at all. It's when the farmers came in and had barley or whatever else was in the valley, that's when a lot of this winter range came in, or winter feeding came into the valley floor. And I'm not an expert, but it was very interesting to hear kind of some of the proposals on what causes some of the winter habitats to happen in the valley for feeding. And again, I'm not an expert, but It was very, very informational. But with the overlays, there's multiple overlays. I don't think the Board of County Commissioners is educated on. We talked about one of the applications that was denied based on having these overlays, had no overlays when they submitted their application. They forced them to have overlays, and then they had 2 overlays. Cindy was arguing with me that there was only one, there was actually 2, sharp-tailed grouse and a big game migration overlay. So, and then she said the overlays didn't encompass that much. But if you had a piece of land that had no overlays, and then you had overlays that even after you're going through the application process, it was very costly, and I think a lot of this is actually happening and going through right now, which is very unfortunate. But I want you guys on the open meeting violations to also understand. I saw today you guys voted in the meeting minutes from October 14th. But October 14th meeting was never noted to the public. We never had the opportunity to come in and be a part of it and speak.
It was a properly noticed meeting, yeah,
It wasn't.
on the website. And, okay, we can go
Well,
back and.
so what I'm saying is, originally before the open meeting violation, October 14th meeting wasn't posted on the website. Then when they went back and posted it, okay, the posted agenda has no location, no way to attend the meeting.
Okay, we'll review that again. But we covered that again today anyway, so
Well,
that's
you can't
good.
Go back and you can't go have a meeting that the public was never informed, and even when you post it, it didn't even have a location or a way to get to the meeting. And approved minutes from the meeting that wasn't even properly done, even after when you post it, it doesn't show that you cured the meeting. And if you put in this case, they posted it, but even posting the October 14th meeting, the information in the October 14th meeting still wasn't done correctly. Even if it was posted originally in the first place where everybody could see it, there was no way for the public to ever be a part of the meeting.
We did not approve the October 2022 meeting.
October 14th, you did today.
We did not approve those
No.
because we didn't have a quorum.
Okay, but you went to go approve it. And
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. I think you're ill-advised on trying to do the right thing and going through and curing some of these, but not really understanding. And I'm not an attorney, but you know, the October 14th meeting was never on the website to begin with. They posted it up on the website, but if you look at the October 14th agenda, it has no location, no way to attend the meeting, no Zoom, nothing. So you can't, I think if you look at all of your guys' deliberations, it's not just the actions under the open meeting law, it's deliberations, it's activities, it's conversation, it's education that leads up to what eventually are these overlays that are voted in. And if you today say, hey, we're just gonna vote these in again, none of the meetings prior to January 9th, 2023 were valid that the public ever had the opportunity to be a part of. So I think that's the intention from the public, is we'd like to be a part of the discussion that go into this. Because we're definitely not the experts. It's fascinating for you guys to talk about what you do and the area of detail, you know, it's well beyond what my understanding is. But I do think understanding fairly what the law is on the open meeting law and allowing the public to be a part of it, rather than just to go back and say, hey, you never had any opportunity to speak on these. You can't just cure a meeting and exempt the public from never having the opportunity to be a part of these conversations, which are extremely valuable.
Okay.
And Idaho Fish and Game and.
Sir, I think we've heard enough. They said 3 minutes.
Yep.
We are attempting to cure those past meetings. These are not public hearings. There was a time frame offered for people to offer comments relevant to the meeting. Thank you.
You said it's not a public hearing. What?
No, this is not a public hearing. We allotted a time at the end of the meeting for people to make comments. You've made a comment.
Is our normal meetings, are we allowed to make public comments? Like a regular wildlife meeting?
At the end of each meeting, there will be an opportunity for a public comment period.
Okay.
That's
So-
what we're doing right now.
This
Thank you.
wasn't an exception. Like if we come to another public meeting where.
Yes.
Okay.
But we are at 2 hearings. There will be hearings where you'll be able to like the same, you're saying, points to the hearing format.
Okay, no, thank you guys, I appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Anthony Wilcox. I want to echo Kurt's comments that I do appreciate all the work you guys do. You're obviously very detail oriented. I've read about all of your individual resumes and bios, and you guys have incredible depth of knowledge on the subject matter. And I appreciate, as an outdoorsman, a hunter, and a fisherman, that you guys are taking the time to help preserve the wildlife and the habitat. And my concern is specifically, and you may or not respond if you don't want to, but I feel like there's some conflicts of interest with some of the members that are on the board. You're Mr. Glassman, right?
I am.
And you're part owner of Intermountain Aquatics.
Yeah.
And if I was a developer and I had to do one of these wildlife studies, your company is one of the companies I could hire to do that work, right?
Potentially.
Right. So I know that you guys are trying to get a pre-approved list, and I've read what the process would look like and what it would mean for the end user. So I have some concerns that you're sitting on this board as a chairman, and this is nothing against, I think you're, overqualified, quite frankly, to be on the board and heading it up, but I do have some concern as a taxpayer, the potential litigation exposure that it puts the taxpayers in, that you're sitting on this board, you own a private business, and please correct me if you would like, if I'm a developer and I hire a company, part of the reason I have to hire your company or a company like yours is because of the work put forth by this committee. The recommendations are made to the county commissioners, and by my estimation, they haven't turned down anything that this group has suggested. Everything is, in essence, been rubber stamped, and perhaps that's not accurate, but that's been my observation. So that's a concern of mine, is that, and that's one of the conflicts of interest. And I understand we only have 3 minutes to speak, but I think it's one of the most important, is that there's someone sitting on the board, in your case, it's you, as a chairman running a private business, that people are,
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll respond to that if you'd like, sir.
I would actually prefer.
I would like to respond to that, sir. As a county commissioner who appointed the members to this board, one of the commissioners who appointed the members of this board, we selected Jeff Clausen because of his extensive wildlife knowledge. We recognize that he is a consultant as well. Our Planning and Zoning Commission has developers, it has real estate folks, it has people who benefit from decisions that are made potentially. They recuse themselves if they're into a situation where there's a specific conflict. But to eliminate people with the kind of knowledge base that Jeff brings to the table would not be in the interest of this committee.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate it. That's why I qualified my statement by saying this is not an attack on his body of work or his resume. I think this entire group is, I think all of you are overqualified in some regards. But again, as a taxpayer, I'm just looking at this from a litigation standpoint, like what is the exposure to the county on that? And this gets into an ethics question, and it's something I plan on bringing up at a future meeting when the opportunity presents itself, that, state law, the ethics law in the state of Idaho allows for a governing body to set up an ethics board. I appreciate that you were part of the appointment process, but it doesn't negate that there's a conflict of interest. The conflict of interest still exists, even if he's overqualified for the position. And again, I can't say enough, I appreciate this entire group and spending the time volunteering and putting this sweat equity, if you will. But in my opinion, and in many other people's opinions, it doesn't negate that there is in fact a conflict of interest. We could go down the rabbit hole. Was that disclosed publicly? Was that reviewed by attorney or a prosecutor or whoever? But again, I can't stress enough, I'm not anti-wildlife. It's quite the contrary, and I could back it up with other evidence. But I'm just looking at this from purely as taxpayers here, we have been forced to bear the burden of decisions of current past elected officials, whether it's Burns Concrete lawsuit, the Teton Creek Resort lawsuit still outstanding. And,
Thank you for your input. Thank you.
Thank you.
They stole some of your time, but hopefully you're okay for.
Well, I'd also like to say something too, so I know we don't have a lot of time, but just so no.
I also have some questions.
It would be nice if you guys introduced yourself. I know Jen. When.
We don't know who you are.
I was gonna say that next. So I'm Kenny. I've been here 28 years. I was going to say some really balanced and had some good ideas, but Mike, your behavior is shameful to me. As a commissioner, I look up to you guys to do better than the public. When you started getting angry, you should have left, and that's the reason I don't think you should be on the committee. So I'm not gonna say anything, and it's your loss, not mine.
Does someone on the Zoom have a
Yeah.
comment?
Hello, can you hear me?
Uh-huh, yes.
Yeah, so, hello, my name is Anthony Reynolds. So I had a couple of things that, I have some issues.
We
with
didn't
how
get your
things-
name, sir.
Oh, sorry, we didn't hear your last name.
Reynolds.
Okay,
Reynolds,
sorry.
does it work?
Yeah, we heard it now.
Okay, so one of my issues, the problems that I have with the way this is going down is it kind of feels like you guys are trying to take a year and a half worth of discussion, information that you guys shared with each other and try to pass it in 1 or 2 meetings without allowing the public to understand where you came to some of this information. Like I saw a lot of these overlays today, but no one explained why from the migration corridor that came from Idaho Fish and Game, we extended that area out multiple miles to where we now have 80% of the county covered in a migration corridor for elk. So it kind of feels like you guys had all these discussions previously and then probably talked about this stuff, explained it back and forth, but the public wasn't properly notified to sit in on the meetings. So we don't know how you did that, didn't have a chance to comment, didn't have a chance to express maybe an issue. Again, I'm with everybody else. I'm not anti-hunting. I'm not any of that stuff. I'm a conservationist myself, but it feels like we're now, you're just basically saying, well, we did the work. You're going to have to trust us. Like we talked about, someone made a comment today about finding information on citizen science. I don't know what that means. I don't know what citizen science is. Is it a lady who sees an elk walk across the street? Because I've been in cities and watched deer walk through, you know, a downtown parking lot, but we don't constitute that a migration corridor. So I'm just trying to figure out where some of this stuff came from. And unfortunately, because we weren't weren't aware of the meeting, some of that stuff we didn't get a chance to see. That's one of my points. And the second thing is like, I understand like a lot of the work needs to be updated. I understand it was old and we changed this thing and we're saying well, we changed 80%. But part of the thing that no one is talking about is when you put an overlay in and it has 6 or let's say it has 2 or 3 overlays, the person now has to do wildlife studies and they have to take into account 2 or 3 different animals. If you're just doing a wildlife study on one corridor because you're in an elk corridor, that's one thing. So each one of those overlays, even though you're saying you only increased the overlay 50% on private land, you might have overlaid someone's property who's trying to do a building with 3 different animals, and no one really knows why we made it so big, why it's so far away. Like I saw the stuff today from the GIS, I saw where we had purple and orange through the state where the actual animals were walking, but yet it looked like we had 40, 50 mile buffer zones for some of the elk and mule deer migration corridors. So, you know, I just think that we need to be careful about it because as the other guys also said, there's litigation problems with this. If we go and you guys shove this down and say, oh, well, we're going to do this, we didn't do the meetings correctly. So therefore, the people that didn't get a chance to listen and input on things are being left out. And that's what's, you know, it's kind of causing, I can see with a lot of other people, some contention.
Thank you. I did want to bring up, are you aware, or maybe folks aren't aware, that summary, the Idaho Fish and Game summary that we are using as our basis is posted on the website, the county website. So just as a reference, if you're interested in going deeper.
Understood, but it doesn't explain how you guys went from that overlay to a buffer zone as big as we have on our on the county, because they don't overlay. If you put the overlay of where they were walking in the Idaho Fish and Game that you showed us, does not cover all of the migration corridor that you put on the county. We showed that today from what was in the GIS data. So we just don't know how it got there. We had a conversation about citizen science, and unfortunately, when you brought it up, we're not supposed to interject. I'm trying to not do the wrong thing in the meetings, but I don't know what science you used to make that buffer zone. Like, well, all that type of information is lost now for the people because you've done it in a meeting that people weren't aware that they could go and see. That's all.
Okay, no, thanks.
Well, sir, there are only two data sources that are being used here. One is the Idaho Fish and Game, and it's encapsulated in their updated wildlife report. The second is the data that the Land Trust brought with regard to sandhill crane foraging. That's it.
I understand that, but if you overlay those on the GIS data, it does not overlay the amount of space that we now have as migration corridors. It's not the same. The overlays are not the same. There's a bunch of migration corridors that are well outside that Idaho Fish and Game area. And that's what I'm trying to figure out is how did we get there? And we didn't have any discussion on that, but you guys are trying to approve this map without any of us having a discussion about how it gets there. I understand what you said, and I understand how to access it, and I've seen it, and we watched it today in the overlay, and you can see the portions, but yet we are buffering to some extent that's now covering 80% of the county.
And Anthony, this is Rob, the GIS manager. Actually, it's pretty confusing because we were throwing a lot of different data on and off there because, yeah, we are trying to compress a number of meetings into one because we don't want to have a whole bunch of meetings to rehash exactly the same information. But
I don't think that's fair, Rob. I don't think that's fair.
Well, fair enough. But my point being that if you put all those layers together, including the big game winter habitat that's in the Idaho Fish and Game report, you'll see that what the committee came up with very closely aligns with all that data. So maybe you missed it with all the stuff coming and going, and I could see how that would happen. But if you want to, come into my office and I'll run through it all with you.
Okay, thank you.
This is Dan Reyes, the county manager. I just wanted to point out that this process is being undertaken by the Wildlife Advisory Committee does not inhibit the public's opportunity to review what's being presented and make suggestions. As Commissioner Whitfield said, nothing is being approved by this group. They're compiling the data, they're making a recommendation. And if somebody from the public, through any of these Wildlife Advisory Committee meetings or public hearings that'll be through P&Z and the Board of County Commissioners, if there is some discrepancy that somebody from the public can show the data that this doesn't mesh with what I've seen on the ground or my game cameras or whatever data you can present, there's that opportunity to be a part of the discussion.
I understand that, but I'm just saying that it was 2 years worth of meetings or a year and a half of meetings to get to this point, sir. I understand your point and I appreciate, again, everyone's work. But in those 2 years, people had discussions, multiple discussions on all of this stuff that none of us are able to, that we're able to do exactly what I'm doing, is having a conversation with you. But yet we're going to be probably working through this in a few months worth of meetings to try to get this approved, when it was, I feel like we need to go back and sit through the meetings and find out, how did you get this? How did you approve that? So that everyone can have a piece, understand what is being going on, what went on to get here, and be able to comment on it. Because we're not able to do that because we weren't there and do not understand how some of this is being put forward, because it didn't take 2 meetings for you. It took a year and a half.
Sir, that's not quite accurate. It took 6 meetings, and 2 of those meetings were properly noticed. So there were 4 meetings that were improperly noticed.
But haven't you been
We're trying to
meeting
recapture. We're going to do it in at least 3 meetings.
But haven't you guys been meeting since you guys had over a year of inappropriate meetings that you guys were going to? That I'm sure
There were meetings held before there was a formal wildlife group, before the county passed a resolution to create the group. And in those meetings, we were primarily talking about how to inform the public about the wildlife resources in the valley. We were not talking about the wildlife overlay. we didn't have the updated wildlife report. It was mostly talking about what can we do to educate a rapidly changing population about the treasures that we have here. That was it.
I understand, it's just, none of us were there.
May
none of us
I
heard the statement.
also,
There wasn't even a formal group, sir.
But you had meetings, sir. I understand that you're a commissioner and I understand that you get frustrated with people and you're giving me a hard time. But there were meetings that you talked about this, that other people in the public who you're supposed to work for and help weren't able to go, weren't able to talk about it. I understand that you say, oh, well, we did it in 6 meetings. I guarantee you had discussions at some of those meetings that affected some of the other things. To say that that is not true, to me, the lady who came up and said that the way you have been conducting yourself is not appropriate. That is not an appropriate statement to tell me that you think that you didn't have a single discussion in those time periods about any of this in that before this was a legitimate group. I just don't think that that's appropriate, sir.
Well, I can tell you we didn't. We had discussions about the fact that we had a wildlife report that was way out of date, and we asked Fish and Game to redo that, and they took, I don't know, a year and a half or something to do that. It was I don't know how long it was. It was quite a long while. But we weren't talking about the natural resource overlay because we had no data to inform it.
may I also add or interject? I'm hoping this is helpful for Anthony and some of the other folks, and maybe I'm way off in misunderstanding, but since actually before we were even talking about the NRO, we have an intrepid note taker, and all of our meetings have minutes recorded. Maybe I'm wrong on this because it's been a while since I've looked way back in detail at these minutes, but I wonder if it would be helpful for the public to review the minutes that have kind of led up to where we are now, because what we're trying to do is go backwards to some of those meetings and revisit. And because we were in those meetings, we may be mentally in a slightly different place, but if folks are very concerned, if they can go and access those minutes before they come to our meetings, it might give you even a little bit more of a leg up on understanding what we're talking about. Is that helpful? And Dan, is that true? Can the public access all those minutes?
Because the meetings were improperly noticed, they're not true meetings, but they are publicly available on the department page for the Wildlife Advisory Committee.
Great.
Notes are.
Okay. And I'll go back and look through some of those meeting notes. I appreciate that because I wasn't aware. It is sometimes very difficult to navigate the website sometimes to try to find things. And I appreciate that. It's just like I said, it's frustrating. I feel like we're in the dark, but being told that we're supposed to be okay with not having the knowledge and then not being involved in it, and then say, well, we're going to work on trying to get this in 2 to 3 meetings, but it took us 6. If that's what you said, 6 meetings, it's going to take us 3, and no one got to publicly comment on any of those 6 meetings because, or whatever, 4, however many were improperly noticed. That's all.
Okay.
But thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I know I went over 3 minutes.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. Well, I think we'll.
I would,
Oh,
I have a couple
sorry.
of questions.
Sorry.
I am also really disappointed that the meetings weren't recorded, because I love to go back and listen to the meetings, because sometimes I hear things that I interpret different than what you have said. So I have a couple of questions on the meeting on the 20th, and I don't know who said it, but I think that someone said that the wildlife study cannot stop people from building. Is that correct or incorrect?
That's correct. The way the code is written, a wildlife study can change the layout of a project, but it can't change the overall density. It can suggest clustering or something to avoid sensitive areas, but the overall density of the subdivision proposal or whatever has to be retained.
Okay, perfect. My other question is, and I think I heard this, and again, since it wasn't recorded, I couldn't go back. I think someone said that we have done a lot of studies and we know where the wildlife are. Is that a correct statement?
What?
Know specifically what item you're referring to as far as.
You got to talk into the mic. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
This is Jeff. I don't know. Can you give a little more background to that?
Well, you were talking about the fish and game studies and the other studies that you had done. And someone made the comment that you knew where the wildlife was because it's been studied so much throughout the valley. It was something in that effect. And is it true that with the studies that you have done and with the fish and game and stuff, that you pretty much know where the wildlife are?
Well, just to reiterate, most of the data is coming from Fish and Game, and they have done the studies. I mean, some of that research involves, radio collared animals and very precise movements, patterns, and other data. For example, the Sandhill Crane data has tens of thousands of observations and points over multiple years. That's really high quality data. So that would be correct. There has been a lot of study and research done on county wildlife, but we're mostly relying on Idaho Fish and Game for that information.
I don't think any credible biologist would say that they know where all the wildlife are.
Well, I don't think it was all the wildlife, but because of the studies, you pretty much know where the wildlife corridors and stuff was the impression that I got. Anyway, so and I think that the maps and the studies that Rob showed us, I think they're very good. My concern is that we pretty much, I guess, know where you want to have this wildlife. I don't understand why we would burden the landowners with additional studies. I think that if you pretty much know where the wildlife is, that you could ask them to move their building envelope if you see a particular problem. I think that we have added so many overlays and so much expense onto builders now that the cost is absolutely ridiculous for someone to try to build in our valley, which is getting rid of the middle class. So I don't know why the building department can't have a map available to them with the wildlife on it. And if a builder or somebody comes in, that they can't look at that map and say, oh, it appears that there's a yada, yada, yada here. Do you think that you could move your building envelope to the north end so that this yada, yada, yada can be in the south end of this property? I don't think that there needs to be burdens added to that build. And that's what these overlays are doing. My last comment is the bear conflict zone. Who's going to police it? If somebody puts a bird feeder out, I don't understand how you're going to police that. Or the bear garbage can. I think that it's a great idea if you're in a bear conflict zone just for your own protection. But I think it's silly to put, again, to try to put restrictions and rules and overlays and stuff on people that cannot be enforced. So I think that is, again, another burden on the community, and especially some of our farmers, and I know there's none of you are farmers or ranchers. I know that sometimes they want their children to stay and help run the farm because we're aging out as farmers here. And it is nearly impossible for that farmer or rancher to build something for children to live in to help with that farm. But because of these overlays and other expenses, we have totally made it nearly impossible for farmers, ranchers, and the people that grew up in this valley to stay. But I do appreciate the work that you've done. We all like wildlife. I just don't think it should be studies that have burdens upon the community. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. And
Well,
thanks for not
thank you
interrupting.
very much. Okay. All right, well, 5 o'clock, folks.
Thank you, everybody. And I really appreciated the public comment too. I do. We should all be speaking our voices. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Jeff.
Don't leave before we adjourn. I motion.
Oh, yes, I won't. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, all
You got
all in
me.
favor. Okay,
Aye.
bye.
Did you motion to adjourn? I missed it. I said aye, but I didn't hear the motion.
So you motioned and you seconded.
Okay.